Everybody, I am Ancillar Nombewu, and I've been given the greatest pleasure to host this panel, moderate this panel. This is a panel that is full of people that I've admired, veteran journalists that we have in the country who've been doing such great work for a very long time. But before we get into that, I think it's very important for us to just understand that being a journalist is hard. As the youngest journalist on this panel, I remember when I decided to be a journalist, I thought I was going to be a war reporter, but I chickened out because of everything that was happening and the fear that comes with journalism. I mean, us, the likes of Ayesha, the Zimbabwean journalist who was abducted in 2015 because of standing up and trying to fight against Robert Mugabe. Ask my friend Kenny, who I met at a refugee camp in Malawi, who ran from Congo because he spoke up and spoke out against the government. So being a journalist can be really, really tough, and this panel is going to sort of take us through what it means to be a journalist in the 21st century and touch on a few ideas on how we can protect ourselves and be protected by the NGOs and the other organizations that we have. So thank you for joining me, panel. Thank you so very much. A few years ago, the world was shook by the public execution of Jean. And I don't know if any of you remember that. He was in Syria and he was a photographer and he was publicly executed. And over the years, we've been seeing more and more journalists get arrested. But right now, it's not even only about war reporting. Even if you report against corruption, etc., your life is threatened. Do you think it's getting worse in terms of safety, being a journalist, or because of the NGOs and the help that we have now, it's a little bit safer? Anyone can start.
Hi. It's a very tricky one to answer, really, because on the one hand, there's obviously a lot more publicity and more movement around the world in terms of, there's more transparency in a way in terms of what's happening. So sometimes that can lead to sort of a feeling that there's more incidents. So you're always dealing with that, with everything. But I would say, and in South Africa in particular, we had an incredible. I've been around for far too long, and coming from the late 80s, where there was incredible harassment, things were really, really dangerous. So now in South Africa, things are not that dangerous for a journalist, so that's localizing. But on the whole, so journalists, I think overall, for me, journalism has always been targeted. I think the craft of journalism, whether it was 50 years ago, 100 years ago, you were always under threat. There is, so, and it will be located in specific areas. But definitely, if we're looking at Africa, there's a lot of major concerns about what's going on. Like if I look at Tanzania, the deterioration of press freedom there is quite shocking. Since 2015, it's so short. It's a very short period of time. We're watching things just decline. And in that way, I think we need to take stock, and also the nature of harassment and threats have obviously changed with online. So now, besides the threat of actually being killed, which does happen still, you've got this sort of almost everyday harassment of journalists. So journalists generally are facing almost everyday harassment. So I think that would be the shift, where everyday journalists are facing harassment, where the sinister threats have always been around, and there's always been those areas, but I think the everyday threats have increased a lot. Yeah.
Look, absolutely, in South Africa, we are quite lucky than the rest of our colleagues in the rest of the continent. What you see are those threats. I wouldn't say idle threats, but the social media kind of thing, where particularly female reporters get threatened by the mob on Twitter with all sorts of violence, starting with rape. But there is, at this point, fortunately, no evidence that any of those threats have been delivered on any of our journalists in South Africa. So we are quite lucky in that sense. And the state, of course, has also barred the arrest of Mr. Africa about 10 years ago by the police. We have not seen direct participation by the state in the physical intimidation of journalists. Yes, there will be an incident here and there where you write about people and they are less than impressed with your story and they shake you up a bit even just by words or so. But largely, let's say this again, in South Africa we are particularly lucky. But the things we see in Zimbabwe, you mentioned Italy. I know a colleague, a friend of mine, Chris Muronzi, who also reports from Zimbabwe. Back in 2007, he severely got beaten up by the police and disappeared for a week. We had to scramble. I was with Media 24 at the time. We had to scramble and find him. When we did finally find him, he couldn't sit on his back and he had to be hospitalized. We had to bring him to South Africa. And that has really not stopped in Zimbabwe, particularly as you're talking about the case of Italy. So across the continent, I mean, you see what's happening in all the countries. You've just mentioned Tanzania. Sudan is not the best of places where to practice as a journalist. So the threats to journalists and journalism have not gone away. Here, from our position in the south of the continent, we've been quite lucky. We have not been exposed to that much violence. Yes, a lot of threats, definitely.
And before you add on to that, just to add on to that question, Sikonathi mentioned these idle threats that come. Maybe when you're answering, touch on what impact those have on the industry, though, because now they're being said so publicly, there should be some sort of impact, perhaps seeing new entrants into the industry or what people generally think about the industry.
I think as the two previous speakers have said, that we in South Africa are very lucky because since 1990, since 1994, we've seen a free press, and the violence and the threats that have been perpetrated against journalists do not necessarily come from government, it comes from organizations. And just recently, in the past 2 months, we've had television crews in the local townships being attacked and having their gear stolen from them and being threatened at knife point and also at gunpoint. So we don't have the kind of threats that people have in other African countries where the violence and the threats are coming from governments. And so, again, yes, we are lucky here in South Africa, but it's not uncommon. I mean, you know, when you enter the journalism profession, as journalists, you have to be prepared to be, the whole thing about shooting the messenger. Because when you're dealing with people, people see us in a position of power. And so when people are angry, when people feel aggrieved, when people are oppressed, and they feel helpless, and they can't go and attack their governments, or they can't attack whoever is oppressing them, of course they're going to attack the messenger. And so when we become journalists, we kind of accept that. And the best way, I guess, to deal with that would be to be as fair and accurate as possible. And even today in South Africa, when we do get complaints from people, the first thing, we say, so what is wrong with the story? What's factually wrong? And very often people are unable to tell you because they, oh, you didn't tell the right story, you said this and you, okay, so what was factually incorrect? And then they'll retreat. But coming back to safety, I worked in Zimbabwe, in Uganda, in Kenya, Madagascar, and Uganda, also in Pakistan and in India. And I think one of the things that we as foreign correspondents, when you're going into an area, but also in South Africa, I think we just assume that because we're South African, we are familiar with each other's cultures, and that we are familiar with each other's religions and people's beliefs. And so, if you're going to go into an area that you're not familiar with, familiarize yourself with the area. Greet people. Be polite. introduce yourself, respect people's cultures, and particularly, and I speak from a South African point of view, where we are so diverse in South Africa, and 25 years after democracy, some of us still don't know about each other's cultures. And so people get angry when there is a funeral, for instance, and when you just go in there with your cameras and you barge into the funeral house. And that's when people get angry with journalists, because they see that as being disrespectful. And so the main thing is to be, yes, of course we need to tell the story. And as journalists, we often use this term, it's in the public interest. And sometimes it's in our interest. It's in our individual publications' interest for us to get the story. It's not in the public interest, because the public will understand the certain sensitivities when you're dealing with cases of funerals, of weddings, of birthdays. And so I would say, in order to play it safe, when you're traveling abroad and when you're traveling in your own country, the main thing is to familiarize yourselves with your surroundings, be polite, and inform people that you're there. I mean, how often do we not travel and we don't inform others that we're in the country? For people traveling, if you're traveling to another country, go and inform the embassy or the consulate, for instance. I'm from South Africa, I'm on an assignment here. Announce yourself, so if anything happens, they are aware of your presence in the country. I think I've said enough for now.
Definitely, we also have a role to play. Thank you so very much for touching on that, in ensuring that we're also safe. I just want to read a quote here from Scott Anderson, who told New York Times this. He says that basically was talking about the execution of journalists, and he says, what this demonstrates is that the business of reporting on war has changed fundamentally. The powers that be in a conflict zone no longer regard the media as a neutral observer, but rather a strategic component, something to be manipulated or co-opted or simply got rid of. Do you think in some parts, Janet, of the continent, this is true? I think he was right to say those words?
Yes, I think I'm thinking now of the case of Azori in Tanzania, the journalist who has disappeared literally 2 years ago. He was covering political killings in rural areas in Tanzania, and to this date he's not been found. So obviously those are kind of incidents quite close to home to us, where we realize, and the incidents in other countries in Southern Africa. And I think that obviously as a journalist, you're out in the field, you're often taking risks, you often not doing all the security checks that Ayesha's calling for. Often you're freelancing. I mean, freelance journalists go in and they get into trouble. And now we're going to get into the conversation about resources and the commitment of companies, journalist companies, to actually protect journalists. I mean, to be honest, they're not doing nearly enough. So that is also, journalists get thrown into quite unsafe environments often, without the required backup of often what is corporate media. And I think that's something where we really have to look at, it's actually a company's responsibility to try and safeguard their journalists. And I think we hear all too often, there isn't enough safety awareness training. People going into areas without realizing, don't display your phone, and whatever you do, don't file on a story in a volatile situation on your phone, rather than get away. But people are having to do fast news, and then they have to file quickly, and they have to do social media, and they have to do everything, so they put their lives at risk, or they put their equipment at risk. So I think that there's just you will always, journalists always be in precarious situations, but it does seem that because of the online threat and because of the nature of some of the hostilities that we can't, I'm at SANEF, I'm always trying to recruit people, always trying to recruit these two that never joined. But, and my view is that if you don't join, that's all we have, so that's another conversation for another day. But every day, SANEF is confronted by threats to journalists. Almost every day, well, not every day, but there are constant reports of threats to journalists' lives. So, or threats of harassment, or threats on, and who's keeping tabs on all these threats, So that's why groupings like SALAF and the CPJ, the Committee to Protect Journalists, and groups like that are so important to try and keep track and to put pressure on government. The CPJ in August wrote a letter to appeal to the SADC countries, to SADC, to say, please, you need to actually make your governments accountable for journalist safety. You need to act, you need to be careful, you need to look at what politicians are doing, and you need much more accountability with protecting journalists. I don't know if anything came of that, but the point is that in the next, up until the end of 2020, more than half of SADC countries are having elections. So it's an incredibly important time now for journalist safety in our region, right on our doorstep. And I think maybe because journalists generally by nature are often quite risk takers. They sometimes need, the backup to kind of steer them and to have those networks that can actually help them if things go wrong. So yeah, thanks.
That's very true. I think we are serious risk takers. As you were talking about the risk, I remember I'll get into my car and call my editor when I'm at the border. Like, oh, this is happening in Zimbabwe right now. Apparently there's a coup. I'm already at the border. So sometimes as journalists we do that, and I think we really need to become accountable to our actions if we end up being abducted, etc. Sikonathi, when Janet was talking, she mentioned resources and the lack thereof, rather, of resources that makes it difficult. So in situations where there's a lot of risk and there's a lot of potential threats that can happen, especially in the conflict areas of our continent, we've seen a lot of press coverage sort of pull back from reporting on those countries or those areas. What impact do you think this is having on the way in which we report on Africa?
Look, obviously, the protection of journalists does require a lot of resources. You talk about companies like Bloomberg. I work for Bloomberg News, and they have dedicated security courses. You will not go to a volatile area if you have not received riot training. And that is a company. Of course, let's be frank here as well. That cost is designed to lower the insurance costs of the employer. So if they sent a journalist without, to Maracana, for example, which I couldn't go until I said they can fire me if they like. I went before I got the training. Had I been killed there, the insurance company would have declined to pay. So Bloomberg has got the resources even to take you on that training and to organize armed escort. Now, of course, we all know that Bloomberg does not depend on news for its profit. It makes money. News is just a marketing tool. So they do have the ability for that. In the rest of the media, the government here in South Africa, we have been victims. The media has been victim to another form of violence from the government, particularly from Jacob Zuma's time. Remember when they took away all advertising, all tenders from the newspapers, and said they would start their own portal? That dealt a major blow to newspapers, such that 10 years ago there were 10,000 active and employed journalists in this country. There's 5,000 now. You can go and start there at that particular incident of violence perpetrated by the government. Very sophisticated. Of course, again, let's repeat this. We are quite lucky in the South African context, where we even have a significant private sector industry that has always come on board and advertised to the extent that it could. In countries like Nigeria, if you pissed off this one advertiser, that's it. Your newspaper is gone. So we've been lucky in those instances. But you asking me about the impact of withdrawing reportage from the countries where there's violence and things because we don't have resources. That leaves those countries, those people, even more vulnerable to more violence, to even more violent forms perpetrated against them. And I don't know what could be done about that. And you're talking about the little us taking risks. Perhaps we need to take a lot more risks personally, as individuals.
Perhaps anything to end with?
Not at this point, no.
So we're talking about the censorship earlier also that can come from governments, etc. We've seen a lot, especially around election season, where governments of Kenya, Rwanda, Sudan, Ethiopia, Zimbabwe shut down the internet. So because of the internet, I guess it becomes easier for us to just spread the information and tell our stories and citizen journalism, etc., etc. But this kind of censorship really puts another dent on the work that we do. Have you seen it in your individual careers have an effect in the countries that you've worked in?
I think particularly in Zimbabwe, because I work as a foreign correspondent for France 24 as well. So I do the English, and I have my colleague does the French. And we're always mindful when we're standing there doing our live crossings, and she'll always say to me, just be careful what you say, because a lot of people here in Zimbabwe, the government, they watch France 24, obviously they understand English, and if you're going to be saying anything against them, they will either revoke your work visa or they won't allow you to come in again. And then of course with that in mind, while you're standing there reporting, there's this tendency to self-censor, which makes no sense, because you're there to cover the story and to tell the rest of the world what's going on, because they're not there. And you're actually doing a disservice to the people of Zimbabwe if you're going to self-censor yourself. So it is actually, placing us journalists in a very difficult position when we do go into these countries and we're actually not able to report the full extent of the story because we fear getting kicked out of the country or not being able to return again.
I must admit to not have traveled as extensively as my colleagues have, so I'm rather a domesticated South African. Look, again, in countries like Zimbabwe, like Nigeria, where the military will just storm into the newsroom and arrest journalists and close down the newspaper, we have not seen that level of intimidation and censorship in South Africa, except that one major incident in Parliament when the phones were jammed. Yes, that of course helped. It helped that they chose such a high profile and the House of Parliament itself. It helped that the government, Jacob Zuma's people, chose Parliament to do that because they were never able to do it anywhere else again. Yes, there will be again against individual journalists. I mean, the famous story of that blood agent from the BBC, Malima chasing away a journalist like that. So you will have these isolated incidents. I wish to again insist that we are quite lucky in South Africa if our colleagues from the rest of the countries here in Africa can get an opportunity. They will tell us real stories of intimidation. The diverse media in South Africa and generally the freedom of the airwaves in terms of the internet has been our best protection. As much as you make people famous for what they have done or said, even when they threaten you privately or in a contained environment, the organizations get compelled to act. My last famous incident at ESCOM 2 years ago with a lawyer who rather threatened to deal with me, and he said it was the African way. I am the African, I didn't know which way that was. Within 12 hours he had lost his job, and people know what's going on. South Africa quickly clamps down on that particular wrong behavior.
The signal jam, you just reminded me of the signal jamming incident because luckily I'm also very domesticated in my coverage, but I was actually in Parliament in the press gallery for that signal jamming incident. And the thing about it was, there were two things. It was such a shock, because I think we have been, fairly free, is in the new South Africa, lived this sort of freedom, kind of everything was sort of like we never felt threatened in that way, and that was just such a moment in journalism in terms of what was happening, the word on the ground in the press gallery, like real, absolutely, almost couldn't believe it. We were dumbfounded that this could actually happen. And the chilling effect of that is that it was a slippery slope. You suddenly realize, okay, this is a slippery slope to, it's a slippery slope to what can happen when the state apparatus starts clamping down again and starts controlling. So it was almost like a tipping point. And everyone immediately started sort of protesting. The journalists were standing up and protesting and holding up their cell phones and saying, bring back the rebellion was immediate. It was quite incredible. And I hadn't seen that for a long time in reporting. So because I think there was an immediate awareness that this is just unbelievable. It's like, how can they even stoop to this level? Obviously it affected the MPs as well down on the floor, who were also doing the same thing. But I think we were on that trajectory of complete state, I think we were heading that way under Zuma, where that's where we would go. And I think we are still climbing back from some weird things that still happen. Like there's just been a stand to be, I don't know the 100% facts, but they put out accreditation requests for the State of the Nation address now for February, and they've asked for state security. The state security got involved earlier than they normally do. So there's a little things that still like kind of creep where the different apparatuses, intelligence is operating on different levels, and we have to just be vigilant the whole time because things slip, and then you just got to constantly correct or point out and make sure it doesn't happen.
I see that you want to say something.
How do you prevent it though? How?
Thank you.
How? Like it seems that it's such a. It's always a bit on the edge, and it happened in other countries on the continent. And yes, there's rebellion, like you said. I remember very much seeing it on the screen and seeing indeed journalists like lifting their phones. But how do you know? What do you do if it happens? What do journalists do to prevent that to happen? What is the SANEF then get involved, and then what do they do? What are the solutions to make sure it doesn't happen, that journalism remains a strong pillar in our democracy and freedom of the press?
I think Sikonathi knows what I'm going to
Rather go one by one. I don't like that academic thing. You have three questions and everyone gets lost with the answers.
I think we can give him the mic.
I mean, that's why I do think it's important to have organizations like South African National Editors Forum, seriously, CPJ, because we're sitting with newsrooms that are under-resourced. SANEF is under-resourced. Everyone's under-resourced. So, and the problem with it is if there's not enough involvement on a mass level, then things do become cabals. You can become your own worst enemy if you don't have mass participation, then you do become a cabal. So, my point is that when that incident happened, SANEF did get involved. And it was a very vocal, immediately approaching the speaker. There were submissions, it went on, and eventually, look, you sometimes feel it's not enough because it's quite reactive. And but the thing is, that's why we need, we're talking about on a broader level, safe spaces in Africa, which is what the conference is about, safe spaces. I think then you do need organizations and networks, and I think at the end of the day, you need editors who have got journalists back. And that is another area of very, very strong weakness in this country even, and in other African countries, where it's often this sort of corporate world which is so tied to government and business that actually they don't have journalists back. They don't have the persons back on the floor and out in the field. So it's up to journalists, and journalists are terrible organizers. They're just by nature it's very hard to get journalists to agree on anything. But if there's a broad agreement about media safety and things like that, then you can try and work around on a very broad level. But it is a problem to answer your question what do you do? And I think the only way is to gather together and actually just say no and resist. And sometimes it means going to court if necessary.
So that particular day, the behavior of journalists, the reaction that day in the House, was a typical South African response where people just refused to sit down and be docile and say, because of the government, go ahead. So they just stood up and generally the public gallery does not participate in any parliamentary processes. That day did participate and forced the speaker to kick those guys out and take that machine, that jamming device out of the House. But that one day showed us how low we had sunk as a state to a totally failed state, and that is where Jacob Zuma was dragging the whole country. I'm not insulting my colleagues when I say to the level the many of the African continents are in terms of how crude the governments just exercise their raw power. Jacob Zuma was fast on his way there, and that one incident showed him that it was not going to be that easy, but it was also the culmination of a process. There was that law that was being promulgated to license journalists, the secrecy bill, but there were in there to regulate journalism, where you had to apply and be registered by the government, and you had to get a license to practice as a journalist. South African media, particularly all the newspapers, got together, much like the Kenyans did during the election, to try and arrest the violence that would accompany the election. Editors got together and decided on the way forward. South African journalists and editors got together and campaigned against that secrecy bill, which would have limited our ability to do our job. And it was a two-year campaign that started around 2011. It was a long campaign where particularly Mondli Makhanya, as leader of SANEF at the time, was most vocal, and all newspapers. We in financial journalism had always been sitting on the sidelines and not participating in the general news, politics. It was beneath us, you see. But the secrecy bill brought us all to our senses, and we all joined the campaign. On another matter, I spoke about the violence of withholding advertising government resources. When the JSE started a mechanism in which it withdrew or it stopped forcing companies to be transparent by advertising in the newspapers, again, media houses lobbied strongly the JSE and major business organizations to stop that campaign. The JSE today is still forcing companies to at least publish something in the newspapers. That's again when journalists get together. So it's unfortunately again it has to be reactionary, because people sit in their lofty offices and plan these things about us. Only then do we find out when they implement. So we can only, when we become aware, do the South African thing and be robust and refuse to